everybody. Very warm welcome here at Hamburger Bahnhof, Nationalgalerie of Contemporary Art, to the next edition of our In Conversation series with artists. Many of you know surely that we are currently one of the exhibiting partners of the Berlin Biennale, and as such, today's talk is also dedicated to a wonderful artist whom we're having the honor to host here in the exhibition of the Berlin Biennale, just literally above us here. So I would like to first of all introduce everyone. We have here Sasha Kohler with us today, the wonderful curator of the Berlin Biennale. Congratulations and thank you for being here. As well as right in the middle, Anawana Haloba, the artist that we are featuring here today. And Axel Wieder, the director of the Berlin Biennale, who will be moderating this conversation today. We would like to also thank Deutsche Bank for supporting this In Conversation series, and some of you might recall the wonderful exhibition at Palais Populaire last year, The Struggle of Memory, where you also created a really fantastic installation. I have also personally very fond memory of this beautiful installation on the staircase, so it's really nice to meet you and have you with us here today. Conversation is as always about 45 minutes or so, and you have the opportunity to ask some questions afterwards. So thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you all a very exciting and wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Till, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. Yeah, it was a nice opportunity to have this conversation with Anawana Haloba today, because she's an exhibiting artist of the 13th Berlin Biennale, as Till just said, but also actually for both Sasha and me, there were also contact points before this exhibition, which is maybe natural for Sasha as the curator of this edition of the Biennale. But yeah, I also happen to know Sasha, Anawana, from previous work engagements, and how to say it, we never really worked together, but we almost worked together, and there will be still a result of this coming in the future. And I wanted to say a few more words, because this is a kind of monographic artist conversation. A few more words about Anawana. Yeah, she's based in Oslo and Livingston, and has a connection to Bergen, where I worked before, because she pursued a PhD there at the Art Academy. This is also like the first couple of times that we met. There's a very nice sentence to describe her approach to artistic practice. Haloba's artworks begin as drafts of poetry in the form of sketches, which are then used to create performative art through video, installation, and sound. And that's in so far an interesting take, since it is kind of clear in your practice there's a very thorough research process happening, and you are also very solidly academically embedded. You're still working at the Art Academy in Oslo as an associate professor, and at the Rijksacademie in Amsterdam as a guest advisor. But the works that you make are often, you're very sculpturally interested. They work with sound, sometimes video, but the experience that they create is very sensual, you could say. And then only by experiencing the work and going into it, one discovers the research threads bit by bit. So it's not so research heavy on the forefront, which is maybe also something to discuss in a bit. Yeah, as you said, you're based also in Oslo since 2002, and you have exhibited internationally a lot now, since over the past 20 years, you could say. You've participated in the Venice Biennial in 2009, at various iterations of the Sharjah Biennale, and you have upcoming exhibitions at Nationalmuseet in Oslo, a big presentation that actually includes some of the works that we are showing here at the Biennale. I'm just trying to get this image up. Exactly. And also some video works. This work is also co-produced by an international foundation, the Hartwig Foundation, and it will have further iterations of being exhibited and also following the presentation in Norway. You're currently also one of the nominees of Artis Mundi, one of the largest art prizes internationally, that will also be accompanied by an exhibition this autumn in Wales. Yeah, and other upcoming shows in Norway in the coming years. Yeah, but maybe it's a good entry to start the conversation to actually go into the work that we're seeing now in the back, the work that you showed, that you have set up, produced also for the Berlin Biennale here with Sasha and the team of the Biennale and the team in Oslo. And maybe to describe it, first of all, it's a series of sculptures that are exhibited in the main hall of KW. There is a sound component, which we can't really represent here, but it's very audible when entering the space. And but then, as I say, like once trying to understand the work and going into a description or reading the label, one notices that there's more ideas behind it. There's a notion of the opera that comes up. Do you want to explain a bit about the work and how the term of an opera comes in here?
Hello? Yeah, first of all, yeah, I should also just apologize that I usually have the tendency to wander when I'm talking. So, but I hope I'll be able to answer the questions to the best of my knowledge. The opera now you see in the KW is been the process. I would say the first opera I made, or what I called an experimental opera, was in 2021 I finished. But it's been a long process from 2018 working on this, and I think now this maybe is the third iteration. I did a work which I still think it's a work in progress, which I showed in Milan 2 years ago, the Polyphonic Soloist, which has this sculptural piece that looks like a masquerade skirt. You don't see it here, but just as in, so I wanted to mention that. Opera for me, that's because I'm borrowing operatic styles from Southern Africa, where I come from. They are usually referred to, within musicology, they're usually referred to as folk opera. So not the real opera, but the kind of, folk always suggests some kind of primitivity. But I thought, for me, because if opera is about love, tragedy, and chaos, and these operas also present the same, why not just opera? But experimental opera is also because I see the objects, you see, whether it's in this opera or the previous opera, as extensions of the people which are singing, which you hear or talking. So I see them as vessels that are present in the space, and that the viewer actually encounters with that. And this idea of the staging of the space. Here, of course, there isn't any stage, but in the previous opera, for instance, you have this round stage, which has also different references of Chokwe cosmology, different Southern African philosophies of where life happens, both from a religion and cosmology, but also through architecture, because the idea of the object standing could also represent buildings as well, where life happens. So when they're in the space, yeah, I don't know if I'm going I don't know if I've answered or...
Maybe here's actually an image of the first iteration that I saw, at least, which was shown in Bergen as a result of your PhD project, actually. And there we have the stage still present. Now one could say the whole gallery space became the stage.
Yeah. Yeah, it became the stage because it's a room also with high walls, and then you have other works in the side creating the center, and of course the interest collaboration with the other artists in the space, because you have Margarita stairs, which almost opens you into this idea of going through this kind of space of performance, which you're laid on through this work by the colleague who is in the same space as me. So, yeah.
Is each of the objects one voice?
Yes, but at the same time it shifts, because I'm also interested in this idea where the human, I think reflecting also into the idea of African philosophies of Ubuntu, which says, I'm me because of you, and whether also those two people can actually be one person. So you have the voice which says, in this opera, for instance, which you see, you have a voice which says, I'm a man, and then another voice which counterreacts says, no, you are not a man, you are me, and I'm a woman. So this shifting of, I think that also plays this, within my culture, for instance, we don't have she or he, gender is very fluid. This is why sometimes I can have somebody in their 70s that still call me dad, and it's a man, and I'm a woman, and I'm being called dad. So for somebody who is listening, you wouldn't understand, but actually that exists in a way that hierarchies change, and also genders shift. So I'm both a woman and a man in different capacities. And that I wanted to play with that in the work, because for me that also to kind of express or show how non-gendered, non-hierarchical kind of notions of knowledges from other parts of the world. Yeah.
Maybe I tried to bring in Sasha, because that's also like seamlessly connecting to your curatorial practice, because you actually organized a second version of the work that we're talking about in Milan, which that was 2 or 3 years ago, around the time at the archive in...
It was the same year, 21, yeah. Then we did another work again, before Berlin.
Yeah. What was that context, and what was your interest in the work, maybe to ask it that way?
Well, I mean, I've been following Anawana's work since your Venice Biennale work, and for my own reasons, never had the courage to get in touch with her. And so it was much later when I was doing a project in Norway that we got in touch again. Maybe I'd like to talk, I mean, of course I can talk about why it was essential to have her work in Milan, but I also want to say a few words about why this work is in the main hall and has the position it does. I mean, when I started doing the Biennale, it was important to collect a group of voices that I would want to be in conversation with for the next 2 years. And so Anawana was one of the very first interlocutors, maybe, and the reason is because I think this is a profound artist who is yes, dealing with the opera form, but then so there's a long tradition of this in contemporary art, from Matthew Barney, you can think of, Christoph Schlesingseev, doing an opera in, where did he do it? In the Congo. But I think what's interesting about what Anawana was saying is that the opera is a much more universal idea. We were saying this also about curation, we were saying this about art history in general, in institutions, that these are, and you had found a whole Southern African traditions of opera, and you were quoting Wol Soyinka and his ideas on opera and how rich this tradition is, and the use of the word opera. And so this idea of discourse and discursivity through the opera form seemed like a perfect way to embed ideas I wanted to explore about orality and the oral tradition in contemporary art right now, as contemporary artists are using it in different formats. And I think maybe some words can be said to, both operas, but especially in the current one, also to the very acerbic, ironic and mocking tone that your operas have, and these constructions of these characters, these women figures. And I wonder if we can talk about them and talk about your artistic research in general. So I often talk of humor, but there's as many humors as there are emotions, And so I'm very interested in your form of really a very precise, critical humor, and the way and process of creating these characters, and therefore the librettos.
I think, with this, for instance, libretto in the exhibition now, I think the first version of it was very sad.
It was a mourning.
Yeah, it was it was quite sad. And I thought, at the moment I think I wrote the version, there was no other way I could have written it. It needed to be sad. But then I think there's a moment in which you stand out what you've put across, and then start looking through and also trying to find yourself in that conversation, sad conversation you have, written. And then you realize also how basically, the honesty of your own shortcomings, and then you try to, to think about them, or self-critique. And I think this is where
maybe I can give a bit of background. So it's just what the libretto is about.
Yeah.
It's called Looking for Mukamusaba.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a real or legendary woman who you've reconstructed through song pieces, right? Through oral history itself. But the opera is about Cameroon, about Congo maybe, about Sudan, about Gaza, about Ukraine perhaps. It goes, and that is why it's so sad and difficult to find one's voice, especially I guess if you're a Zambian artist, but living between Zambia and Norway, right? As you do because of your commitments and to Loka and the arts space there. And then talking also maybe back to the thematics of the biennial in a way, because you have this whole you have a whole analytical side to this lament. So the way we arranged it also was it's a central piazza, but you also have to cross through this pain, because it's a threshold before arriving to the other side of the hall. And I think this when you say, for example, mandate, I don't have the mandate, and then I know what the word means, but I had to look it up again while preparing for this talk, and it's an official order or commission to do something, and Anawana spends a lot of the opera discussing who has the mandate, who's missing the mandate. I don't have the mandate. No, but I have a mandate, but it tells me to not hear, not see. And it really seems like it's an address to Berlin right now. And
I mean, an address to every space, because as I was trying to talk about my own complicity to what is going on, like how do you respond, or how do you talk about difficult things, and at the same time be aware of your own silence. And is that silence there because you're unable to say what you need to say as a person who is observing? Or is that because there are powers beyond which, for you to function within that structure, that you need to be silent? Or is it a silence which basically you are helpless, numbed, by the whole situation, that you drown into the... So this is also, I think for me, I have also to, because at the same time, as I'm talking about silence, but I'm also talking, at the same time, there's a lot, which actually, it's nice that Abby is here today, because actually there's a line which is inspired by my conversation with her, where we talk about how people go on the streets to protest, but at the same time talk about how they are not able to sleep or eat their breakfast. So, and I mean, when we're talking about it, I thought like, oh God. And then I thought of myself that I also am able to sleep and swallow my breakfast or whatever meal at the time of the day. And yet we speak about issues or brutality that is happening as if it's a trend, And I think with that, I think what the libretto does as well, it asks the question, what is true solidarity? Like questions, who is in solidarity, who is listening, how are we listening? Also, it enacts because in some of the objects, like the silicone, whether it's a silicone or the bronze round with a stew on top, the nyangwengwe instrument, actually, which is played by women, you hear the voice, but somehow the voice is muffled. So there's a two action which is happening. It illustrates the position of wanting to say out something, but not being able to, because you hear the muffledness. It's almost like somebody puts your, like, and then the other part is then who is also listening, So there's a two kind of positions which are happening. It's first of all for the listener, whether they are actually able to pay attention to try to hear that voice that comes from that muffledness or not. So, and I think for me, because you are also talking about, it's about Gaza, it's about Palestine, Gaza and Palestine, of course, it's about Ukraine, it's about Cameroon, a place which not many people hear about and don't know what is going on there. It's about Congo, It's also about the old things, It's about talking about, the Congo is like a mass grave, It's about slavery, the Atlantic is a mass grave. So it's all these things, but how do we talk about these things? If I could use satire to poke to people, because sometimes we are so scared to speak out things, and then we don't, because we are so scared to talk, then we are not able to talk together. I think the moment we try to allow ourselves to speak the most difficult things, to cry and laugh at the same time, and I think we will be able to understand each other. And I think, I don't know if I'm managing, but that's my strive, you know. I don't know if it gets to the person who comes in the space and, you know, experience the work. And of course, there are all these references. Axel, you talk about research, that every anecdote, all these moments, all these spaces, like one has to stay with them, one has to read them, and then you also have the theories that try to understand our world and write in philosophy, whether it's social sciences, which also I'm trying to have a conversation with. But at the end of the day, as an artist, this is just my contribution to that discussion. So I don't know if I'm going round, I'm making myself clear.
What about these characters? Because can you tell us more about the iconography of, because I remember you saying, yes, we always borrow from the traditional sculpture and we are influenced by it. But sometimes, maybe it's time, I don't know what you said, but it was very flippant. It was a late night call and you said maybe sometimes we need to invent our own metaphors for today and our own iconographies for today. So Muka Musaba, maybe you can say more about her, but also the other female fanons that you talk about, but also why the main piece looks like a protest megaphone. And there are other details in the sculpture that really come out of contemporary life, and yet they're being formalized into a new iconographies and new ideas around sculpture.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, I can start with the horn. You know, there's one of the sculptures in this which has got a horn, but also, this one, but also in the previous experimental opera, also you see different horns. I mean, they play two things. In the olden days, horns were also a way in which to, to announce from one village to another village. But then I was also interested that the horn actually, for me, there's one of the operatic traditions which is now protected by UNESCO, is a tradition which you find both on the Zambian side and on the Zimbabwean side. It's called Budima. And they play like these tiny flutes which are made from goat or antelope. And it's one chord per instrument. So it goes beep, and then the other one beep, 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 beep. So it becomes this huge polyphonic kind of sounding, played by hundreds of people at the same time, and actually they do that to remember people that died during the colonial time in 1952, when the British government decided, or the British colonial government decided to build a dam in between Zimbabwe and Zambia, and in Zimbabwe, where these people are a minority, they're also a protected culture. And then in Zambia, that's where you find a bigger chunk. And because of that dam, people were moved from these fertile lands into the plateau, and most of them died. And some of them protested, they didn't want to leave, so they stayed. But at the same time, in 1952, apparently a flood, which happens only after 10,000 years, occurred. It broke the whole wall which the British were building. They had to bring back an Italian company to rebuild the dam. And the people there believed that, they believe in this, like the Loch Ness monster, which is called Nyami Nyami, that Nyami Nyami had been separated from her partner, so that was her wrath. But everything really got destroyed. I mean, we also talk about, there's this very trendy word within the art world, which is called the Anthropocene. So because what happened, it created new islands. And then the colonial government decided to save the animals. So they have it's an interesting video. If you have time, find it on YouTube. It's called Operation Noah, where they're trying to save the animals. So it's like, first of all, you go and destroy the land, and then something happens, and then you come up with this special project how you're going to create, wildlife conservations by saving, these poor animals with boats. This is why it's called, almost relating it also to biblical, Noah's Ark. So all these, where was I going? I was telling the story about the Wudima, but the flute playing is about, they do this in memory of the people that had died. And when I was working with this horn, I discovered there's a horn flute in Norway which is called book horn. And so I tried to start creating my own instruments, but which are based within cultures which are being practiced now. And Mukamsava also, because the big sculpture you see in the middle, I call it Mukamsava. I don't know if Mukamsava is a fictional, I don't know if she really existed. That's also something. There's a story that Mukamsava actually existed and she fought against colonialism. There's an area and a school which is named after her. And there are all these narratives. Mukamsava, in my mother's language, Lozi, means you shall fear her. But there are other people that claim she could have been wife of Musava, which is also said in the same way, Mukamsava, which could mean wife of. But I've been playing with all this because when you talk wife of, it also would mean that erases the idea that Mukamsava was this colonial, matriarch, anti-colonial matriarch. And for me, so I play with these ideas of these women that have existed, like Lenshina as well, who is created in this. So the sculpture becomes Mukamsava, but at the same time, it's a combination of other women, Lenshina, who stood against colonialism and the first regime, and she was arrested from 1964 until 1978 when she died on house arrest. And then you have Lucy Sichone, who was a civil rights and a civil society or civic educator who stood against the third, what was it called, the multi-party democracy in the 90s against the then government, which wanted to go for a third term. So I'm interested in the idea of resistance, which is crafted through women. So creating this idea of nation building, which is actually done through women craft. So the baskets are there, they refer to that. The sculpture, which has a stool and a kind of a bowl that looks like what do you call? It's there, if you can see that little one there. So it's actually a clay pot, which is used for cooking or storing water, but turned upside down. And then they take the three-legged everyday stools, which are used in the community, and they start rubbing. And it creates this friction drum sound, and they move with their shoulders, dance, following the move of the friction or the movement of the stool over the lower clay pot. So for me, I think these works kind of creating, I'm calling the other one, I call it Copper Lady because it was very easy for me to, so I gave each one of them names. And the silicone piece, which you see there, it's actually inspired by two things. When you look at it, it could look like one of these water missiles, you know, in the olden days, in the 1940s. But at the same time, it actually borrows from a small little sculpture made from clay and calabash with two openings, which is called Omundo, which is taught by, in counseling, marriage counseling or community counseling. You know, when you blow, because there are these openings on the side there, it's almost like on the other side. So if you blow at the same time, you don't hear each other, you know. But if one blows at the same time, at one time, and while the other one listens, there's this beautiful sound that comes out. And Umundo, which is so kind of refers to the elephant's roar. So for me, I played around with it because then I imagined, what if the other one is just continuously talking and they don't want to listen to the other one? Obviously, they are part of the horn will just be totally distorted. And this is what and to just show that this unequal way in which the world exists. You have things that are on a higher hierarchy and you have things that are not so interesting. So I play with that. And I mean, skin, I use skin, I use the calabash, which I think for most people that knows West African music, you understand how it's used in different West African instruments. But for me, it also creates something else, because also during my research period, since I started these projects in 2009, actually, 2011, 10, 12, when I was also doing a research at the Smithsonian, a lot of this conversation went over food. So I bring these to making, you know, when I start making. When you see the mortar there and the piezo which is standing, I don't know if I'm doing exactly what you asked me, because so,
it's an iconography.
Yeah, so the mortar you see there, it's, I mean, I think most people have seen, you use it for pounding rice and maize. But at the same time, when I was a kid, if you had mumps, they would put herbs in the mortar, and then they would tell you, like, go and scream in the mortar, because when you scream, Makilian, Makilian, whoa, you know, and because you're screaming so many times, so you're opening your throat, so you're inhaling the medicine. But nobody told me that actually that was a medicinal kind of how to make, compared to, you know, making with okra and putting the herbs and putting the finger and trying to rub the kid's inner mouth. So when I was asking my mom, like, why did you force kids to do that? She said, no, because, you know, it's part of, because kids get so scared to be, you know, to have things inserted in their mouth. So that's the way in which you can help the kid to open up their throat and their mouth.
And speak.
And speak as well. So I play with this, but now in here they become also vessels. They become the women you hear, the men you hear, the mixed gendered characters in the work, that these vessels in which they come from, these vessels become them, they become part of them. Because I think I'm also interested in this idea that we have, that, and we speak of things having their own minds, you know, objects becoming to talk. And so this is, in a way, I think there's an interesting movie called, we talked about it. Is that Bamako? No, Dahomey, is that? Dahomey, where the sculpture is actually speaking. It's made by a French filmmaker, and it's very interesting. So, for me, I think this is also, if you could call it a reference, because usually they say artistic practice, who is inspiring you? How are you inspired by other practices? So I think it is film, but I think for me, there's a connection there. There are other, distant ways of working with skin as well, which other, your people here in German, I like Joseph Beuys's work to an extent, because I feel that he's also
the whole building is full here.
That he's tapping also in these cultures which are non-Western, and where I come from. So I am also embracing those, because at least I come from there. I could have a conversation with him, and this is also because there's also an element, because the women which are referenced here are also dead, But there's this idea of also, because at the same time, I talk about masquerades, that talking with the dead is also in a way, because we believe that masquerades are spirits from the dead that come to perform in the life of the living, so that at that moment, the living and the dead's encounter is when God becomes manifest. Of course, if there are religious people here, they would arrest me. But if you think of spirituality beyond the church, I think it exists in other ways. So in a way, also here, because they are dead people I'm referencing. So I'm hoping that when also you're experiencing the opera, that you are also having conversation with the dead. But the dead can also be ideas, ideologies which have existed, which are important now, but somehow we are not engaging with them, that maybe in a way, the libretto, the work itself, that somehow brings something. I don't know if that's, it's just a wish, which I have when I'm working as well.
Maybe I try to make a bit of a jump, but looking at the work, or this work, and your work maybe in a broader sense, there's often, as I said, research, and there's a lot of detailed things that can be seen in the works, and this is often about also the relationship of between Africa or Zambia and Europe, and the history, and the often conflicted history. And then also, as we just discussed with the libretto, which is focusing on a whole history of painful events. But then experiencing the work, there's almost something soothing. Especially with this one, but then also with some older works with you, there is this kind of atmospheric moment where, as a visitor going in, there's also something calming, and it's opening the space that is, inviting to reflection, or to, and I found this, now also talking, interesting, this kind of almost like juxtaposition or connection between this kind of incredible depth field of knowledge and the kind of painful historical and current events that it relates to, and then this effect that it has on at least my body or my mind coming into the space, that it has this kind of, it's opening a space, and it's soothing in the way that it's creating a kind of calmness and space to think. And maybe I hope the jump is not too big, but we put these older works into the presentation from Sao Paulo, actually, I think, which is a work I haven't seen, but kind of also has this kind of it's also creating an interaction in the space, and it's very slow. Can you talk a bit about this work? I hope one can see anything on the picture. It's quite dark.
Close Up, it's called. I mean, it's a work. Yeah, it showed 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago at Palais Popular. Yeah, and it's going to be one of the works in the show in November in Oslo. Close Up, I mean, it has also, it's like now, when you're talking about it, because actually it also has a script, and the time I was writing the script, I was writing at the same time when I was exchanging with another artist who was also writing a script for his performance, who is passed on now. Is it 2 years ago? And so it's a bit, always when I think of it now, I think of him a lot. And yeah, it's talking about land. It references also, I think, this work also, because it comes at a time when, in conversation with another work, which is called This and Many More, which is basically, you have 4 barrows that look like they're rusted, and they have these videos on top of them, but they are reflecting, they start, if I had to put it from a chronological point of view, they start from the point of discussing the first protest, one of the first protests, which is in India, the Salt March, led by Gandhi, and land. And then it moves, because you have the barrows as well, it moves to the sand drilling in Canada. So it is commenting and questioning the politics of excavation of resources by the West, but at the same time taking away from the indigenous communities in those areas. And when the research arrives in Sao Paulo, because I had been in Sao Paulo from 2009, going and coming back, and then in 2016, when I was invited to take part in the Sao Paulo Biennial, I continued with the conversation, because it was always shocking for me when I arrived, when I talked to people talked very much about their German heritage, Italian heritage, or Spanish heritage, or Portuguese heritage. There wasn't really, and then I would ask, like, where were the indigenous people in Sao Paulo? And nobody really talked so much about it. But then you have this park, which is called Ibirapuera, with a very indigenous name, where the Sao Paulo happened. So I managed to find a community of the Guarani people. And so I also thought I wanted to name this work Close Up, as bringing the conversation closer. And in the conversation, it's basically, which is recited by an American friend of mine in the words, but at the same time, there's an ongoing conversation between me and the Guarani man, which he speaks in Guarani, where we recount the moons, and I'm speaking in Luyana, which is the old language the Lozi people used to speak, which is extinct. So then it also comments about the knowledges and how they are being erased, and also, but also kind of, what's the English word? Trying also to appeal for slow knowledge. Like, so this is why it's so slow, and the salt drops, which for some people, they refer to tears, the salt tears, which, like, each stone is like one, almost, the idea was like one drop per 10 seconds. So it creates this symphony in the space, and then you have this voice in the back. I think what you have there is is from the exhibition in Sao Paulo, and over the time, some of the dishes had these salt crystals standing, and at some point we had a spill, so the salt goes in the place. But also what it does actually, because in this space was closed, I don't know, because I didn't go to Palais Popular many times, but in this closed space, every time you walked in the space, you could actually taste the salt on your tongue. So it just went into the humid. So I don't know if I explain it very well. It's also quite emotional to think about it. So yeah.
That was good. Where does the water come from actually? Because the water is in this dropping down from the salt crystals, right?
Yeah. So you have when I came up with it, I had the idea that I wanted to build my own salt blocks so that they could be exposed at a certain heat and they melt on their own. And of course, then we needed a lot of money and a whole lab at the university in Trondheim, and then nobody was ready to put money into it. So then we rigged it. So there's tiny drops of water, these tiny tubes that drop on the salt, and then over time it goes over. And so what is actually happening is dissolving and not really melting. So,
yeah, I realize we are kind of at the end of our time. We have not talked yet about Loka.
yeah.
But
So
maybe we just do this as a kind of in advance of questions, because this is a kind of it's also part of the Biennale. It's important for your work. It's an extension of your practice. As I mentioned in the beginning, it's very multi-layered. You work in many areas, and one is also that you founded your own institute, or you initiated an institute together with other people now in Livingston, which is again like about exchange between Zambia and the rest of the world, and also actually fueled by you from Norway. But it actually does create these kind of connections. Two of the other participating artists in the Biennale, Sasha, you met actually through Loka. Can you talk a bit about that project, and actually both of you also, because I have never been there, and what it is?
yeah, I guess we are part of Loka. We tend to claim Zasha to be part of Loka, and so she's of course advising us. Loka came up when we started Loka. We were three of us, Milumbe and Victor, both Zambia. Milumbe is a former architect that became an artist living in Toronto now, and Victor Mtelekesha is also an artist from Zambia. So we started by trying to historicize the gap between, because when we came to study, we started seeing like African artists, artists from different places, and we didn't have anyone to talk about or refer our practices, kind of create that art historical conversational link. And so Loka started from that. And also the fact that where we come from, we don't have formal art schools. We have like one college that offers art education for secondary school teaching. And so Loka came out of that. And then I think later on in 2017, when I started doing my PhD, which I actually have not finished. So I'm working on finishing it now. I thought, what if I were to teach my practice to a next person, in what form, how do I structure that? So this is actually how we started the lab. And we started it with, it was me and a friend of mine. We studied together at the Reich some years ago, who lives from Guatemala. So that's how, I think the form of what LOCA is now, it functions in that idea of that it's this pedagogical platform and acts as an alternative school for criticality, but also how we can think about contemporary art in relation to language, to where we are, and the politics of orality. And also, we are doing this project which is called Sonic Solidarities, which also starts to look at rethinking how do we create pedagogies for the histories that have happened in that area. So luckily enough, 2 years ago, I was invited also to participate in a project which wanted to do exactly that, so which feeds into our project. So LOCA is a platform. So we have these labs, Ben and Isaac, that are participating in this biannual, also alumni from this. Ben came from basically just being a writer and us telling him, you can also do visual arts. And it's quite a beautiful thing to see their careers blossoming. Yeah.
I think we are encouraged to start with Q&A.
Yeah. But you're also welcome to Zambia. So we have a free tiny apartment you can stay.
Thank you for the talk. My question is that from your deep engagement with African operatic traditions, what aspects do you find most distinct from Western operatic forms?
I think, first of all, I think the first opera was made in China, if I'm not mistaken. And then you had, I think then the opera which was made in Seville, which was also working with Greek tragedy, for me, which I refer to, which for me is similar to Yoruba tragedy. And so that's in itself, there is a similarity, but the form in which opera, because opera is also a mixture of different cultures, Western opera, yeah? And of course, when it started, it wasn't like this high, this high art as we know it today, that when we talk about opera today, we also talk about class without, screaming class. But somehow this was not the position. And I think, I don't know if I'm not interested in trying to create distinctions, because I think these are forms which came out from different needs, And so you cannot really make that distinction. But I'm trying to claim that just because one does not understand the faculties on which something has been formed from does not make it primitive, So why should the other opera be folk and the other one, And then there are these similarities. For me, what was interesting, because when I started researching on early operas within Africa, practiced, written, I came up with the Nigerian opera composer called Duro in the early 60s. And for me, what was really interesting was to hear how the Nigerian operatic singers were using their voice quite similar with the early operas in China, And then I was interested, that made me really get interested in that somehow culture is not this isolated thing which you just find in one place, that you could, look for it, that you could find things which are parallel almost at the same time which are happening. So I get interested with that. I also get interested in re-looking at the opera, Western opera, and try to see if I could retrieve, if I could retrieve the African drum from it, for instance, like retrieve some of the different influences which are foreign, which were not Western. And that becomes my interest. Yeah, I don't know if I'm answering you, but yeah. I mean, something we didn't talk about, he read about it, this writing. For me, writing is a form of making, that the writing becomes the object, and the writing can stay as words, but they can also stay as words which I do not have to embody, but they can be embodied by somebody else. So in a way, when I'm writing, then I invite people, friends, and then they embody those words. And I think we had a question in Milan when we showed the previous opera. We were asked how was it possible to create this confrontational between when the people encounter the opera and themselves, they encounter themselves, almost like the opera is actually like confronting them, And this is for me some of the things which happen, because when I give the words to the other person, so then they embody that and they confront me with my words, and then we have that conversation. So then the recording is always very much like you bring in, real people to either interpret or embody the words which I have written. But then at the same time is the musicality, because this one doesn't have so much music, but the other one has a lot of musicality. And because I want the sound or the music, the styles or the way of playing drum, like the way these people, which happens in the operas when they are performed in Zambia. So I invite Sidi Kamara, who is like my teacher in a way. He's one of, I think, one of the renowned jazz percussionists in Europe. He's from Mali. So I basically make him listen to different types of drumming from Zambia. And then we take everything out. And then it's just me and him in the studio. And then he starts to respond. He plays from memory what he had heard. And then we play back the sound, and then he responds to what he's hearing, his own. And sometimes we have like a board like this one, and I am wearing high heels, and I start moving to some dances, and then he has to respond. So it's all this kind of sounding which is happening. And other works I am inspired by, like, in another work which is called Tumaz, we don't have here. Basically, in Zambia, we had this movement of Zamrock, psychedelic rock music in the late 50s, 60s. And sometimes I would have musicians in the studio to respond to the era of Zamrock, but also using traditional instruments to play with that. So I don't know if I answered.
Can I just add or frame it as a question, but I know that, or I want to know whether it's still true for you that these voices split up, they're also one collective subconscious or even your subconscious, right? So it's, going back to your first question, there isn't really a narrative drive, right? Maybe that's one difference, that the opera is more a splitting of a psyche, and it's always an argument somehow, or a conversation that is, so you have to go from one to the other, but these could be very well voices in one's head, or they, at least in the previous opera, and in this one, there is more a sense that it's not necessarily the same person, but definitely different positionalities. But I was wondering, if this is also how you relate to narrative and
I think also maybe that what you're saying also could talk about when you were asking about humor and satire in the work, because I have this I have this idea that I've got 7 people that live in my head. You have the cynical guy, you have the one who is always very argumentative. So also when I'm writing, I play that I'm those people, but at the same time, because I live in this world, I see things, so I'm also in conversation with what is happening. So there's this conversation with what is happening, the people I meet, and what I read, but at the same time is also the after conversation within my head, the noises of my mind. So that also, they help to form the language, the tone, when it comes to creating the librettos or the poetic or the scripts. So they play quite a big role. So yeah, I mean, when I was a younger artist, I used to say like, oh yeah, the noises of my mind. I say it a lot of the time that. And then sometimes you wonder whether people are going to worry whether, are you okay? But I think it's part of a process. And I think maybe it also comes from this idea of whether, in the severalness in which we exist as human beings, that we can be different personalities and which play different roles. And I think also in the libretto now, there's, I don't know if it's the 7th speaker or maybe the 6th speaker. He doesn't finish his word. A sentence just stops and he says, I would like to summon Anansi, the god of scenario, and goes, and stops. And Anansi is this spider god who, like the same way as Ife in Yoruba, which the British, when they came, or Christianity when it came, they couldn't understand that Ife could be a god, because he's not a god who says, like, if you do good, you go to heaven. He'll tell you, like, you can do this, you get this result, you do this, you get this result, you do this. And then when they wanted to find who the devil was, Ife became the devil, But that kind of elusiveness, which probably also speaks to the idea of the fox, this idea of foxing, that this elusiveness of not giving you the word, but that it can be in different ways. And that repeats itself in different scenarios within African civilization and understanding of how you look at knowledge and how knowledge can be in itself as different layers of understanding things, and you have to pick what is good for that problem, I don't know if I shouldn't go
I think
so much, but maybe also points to the oralities, which, so.
Yeah. I think the signals are, we are at the end of our time, and it's 2 voices. One is, would be nice to continue here, but there's also the outside world calling, and I think we have to, finish here now.
Yeah, thank you so much to all of you. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, Anawana. Thank you, Axel, for being here today. The conversations can, of course, continue. Hamburger Bahnhof is open until 6 today, so if you haven't had the chance to see the Biennale, of course, the other exhibition, but in particular the Biennale, you can do so until 6 o'clock, including your installation. And maybe if you're around, I'm sure you can answer more questions also to the audience afterwards. Thank you so much for the great conversation. I would like to also let you know, In Conversation is taking a break in August for the summer holidays. We are back in September, actually continuing on the theme of opera as part of our exhibition with Petrit Halilai. He is our next guest in Conversation, and he himself is actually featuring an opera set inside the exhibition with the National Opera of Kosovo. September 12th, Saturday at 3 p.m. is this talk. At September 14th are the live performances with the opera inside the exhibition and as well outside the building. So have a great summer. Thank you for coming, and see you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you.